Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I was about 21 or 22 when this happened. I was in the military at Fort Sill and didn't know it, but Desert Storm was right around the corner. At the time, I lived in south central Oklahoma on the outskirts of a small town called Duncan. I was helping a friend round up some cattle that got out because someone had run across a T-section and went through their fence. It tore 2 posts down and left a 30-foot section open for the cattle to get out. We'd already found most of the cattle and we were missing another 3 or 4, so we were out at 1 AM on dirt bikes trying to find them before someone hit one of them and sued his father. My friend and I went east and the other guys went north and south. One thing you need to understand about Oklahoma is that most of it is farmed, either cattle or crops. It is also divided into 1-mile sections for the most part. In other words, the roads all run north and south or east and west and intersect at 1-mile intervals. If you ask directions for something out in the country, you're more likely than not to get instructions that include go 3-mile sections north and then 2-mile sections west. The area at this time was sparse and there weren't many homes. We didn't know how long the hole had been in the fence. My friend's father only checked the fence because he was missing livestock. They owned the entire mile section and a good portion of the adjoining mile section. The hole in the fence was on the east side of their land, at the furthest distance from their house. They checked the fence for such holes on a weekly basis, so the hole could not have been more than 2 days old. James and I were riding on these old dusty dirt roads with battery-powered spotlights to both show the way and to search for cattle. We'd stop at any of the million small wooden bridges and look to see if there were any cows down by the water. Our plan was to go out 10 miles and then go over a mile section and drive back 10 miles until we'd gone a total of 10 miles out and 10 miles over. Then we would do it all over again, but on the north and south roads instead of the east and west roads. If you were to plot it a map, it would be a 10 by 10 grid. We had been at it since before 9 PM, just as it was getting dark and we'd already gone 10 miles out and about 3 miles over. I need to mention at this point that there are some mile sections that are not divided by roads and you have to turn one way or another at a T intersection. If that happens, we always took the road that went in our general direction of travel. If we were traveling east and came to a T and we'd already checked the road north of us, then we head to the south a mile and then head east again. Occasionally, an old farmer would pass away and leave his land to relatives who had no interest in farming, and the land would be up for sale or just left alone for years. When this happens, and the roads aren't used as much, nature reclaims them and you're usually left with a dirt road with weeds and grass growing on it, or you're left with little more than an improved trail, usually 2 ruts with overgrown weeds and Johnson grass and occasionally a tree. We were on one of those rutted roads, headed south to the next intersection where we turned east again. The land here was too hilly for cultivation and had been left alone for at least the last 30 years. We were both familiar with it and we hunted and fished there. This mile section and the next 2 were basically wild. At the end of the dirt trail would be a T intersection, but the west side was fenced and the only option was to turn east again. At the end of this mile section, the road was a dead end, but we had to check it and then double back. We just made the turn back to the east when we saw something burning over the next rise. Grass fires are extremely dangerous and can get out of control in minutes. As we topped the rise, we saw the fire was actually in the middle of the dirt road. When we got to it, we found that it was a recliner that was burning, a blue Lazy Boy recliner. We stopped and threw some dirt on it and finally got it extinguished. James and I were wondering what kind of an idiot would do this and how strange it was to be in the middle of the road just burning. Satisfied that the fire was out, we got back on our bikes and idled past the recliner toward the end of the mile section, still a quarter of a mile in the distance. We found one of their cows at the bottom of the rise, about 100 feet down the road. It was laying in and half out of the road. Its throat had been cut and it was laying there with its eyes open and tongue hanging out. There was blood everywhere. As we were looking at it and trying to figure out what happened, James said, "Hey, look at this." It showed me where the blood had dripped from the cow to about 10 feet away from it. There were shoe prints of blood in the road. It was just part of a shoe print, but you could tell that was a shoe print. We found 2 more when we looked more diligently. At this point, the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up and it was suddenly a very cool evening. I looked at James and his eyes were as big as saucers. He thought something spooky was happening too. We talked about going back, but we knew that we'd be shamed if we didn't see if there was anything else. We finally decided to walk the bikes the rest of the way to the dead end just in case there was someone there. We didn't want them to hear the engines. We began walking the last quarter mile or so to the dead end. It was at the base of the last hill and we just started heading up onto the other side. My heart was going at about 200 miles per hour, and I had cotton mouth so bad that it was almost impossible to swallow. Then I noticed that someone had stuck paper plates to the barbs of the wire on the fence. We looked and there were plates stuck to the top strand of a wire on both sides of the road. It started about 50 feet behind us, it continued up and over the hill. They were evenly spaced about 5 feet apart. As our gaze followed the row of paper plates up the top of the hill, James suddenly said, "There's another fire," and it was at that moment that I could smell it. But what I smelled wasn't that normal smoky smell. It was as though someone had added incense into it. I asked James if he could smell that, and he could. I told him that I didn't like this at all. I was okay with losing face in front of our friends and his dad and brothers. I was ready to go. He agreed with me but said that we had to see what was burning. We were both whispering and we were both shaking so much that our voices quivered. We started up the hill again and I was thinking with every step that we were going to be seriously killed or worse. As we got to the top of the hill, one of the paper plates blew off the fence and skittered behind us, making both of us jump, and it was all I could do to not scream. After I saw what it was, I started to laugh it off, but James shushed me and told me to listen. We could hear voices. As we topped the hill and were able to see the bottom where the road stopped, we saw a group of about 10 people all standing around another recliner that was burning. They had their backs to us and they were passing a big picture around. From our vantage point, we couldn't actually see what was in the picture, but the slit throat of the cow haunted my thoughts. They would each take a mouthful and spit it into the fire. This went on until the picture was empty. The entire time, they were all saying something in unison. We could only understand an occasional word. They changed their tones in a rhythmic manner with an emphasis on the last word. I can remember hearing here and there and beseech and father. James and I stood there on top of the hill like a couple of idiots, our mouths hanging wide open and actually scared stiff. After a minute or two, they would repeat whatever it was, all the while passing around that pitcher and spitting it into the fire. There was a small camp table set up on the side and a little behind them. After the last of the liquid was gone, a man turned and sat the pitcher on the table and picked up what looked like a large loaf of bread. Just as he was turning back to the fire, he evidently saw us. I am sure that we made a nice silhouette sitting there at the top of the hill. He screamed, "Hey!" and dropped the loaf of bread and started running in our direction. The others turned and immediately followed him. That was all the encouragement that we needed. It was time to go. We turned our bikes around. James got his started on the first kick, but I somehow managed to get myself off balance, and when I kicked, the bike fell on its side with me. By this time I was near panic and was breathing in raspy, short breaths. I picked the bike up again and tried to start it, but it didn't start. I thought about running, but we were out in the middle of nowhere. I finally started pushing the motorcycle down the other side of the hill and jumped on it. It seemed like it took forever to get enough speed, but I popped the clutch and it started. James was waiting at the corner of the intersection to make sure that I was coming, and we were headed for his house, going way too fast for safety, especially in the dark. When we finally got back to his house, we told his dad what we'd seen. His dad called a couple of friends, and they all loaded up in their trucks with enough weapons to start a small war. James and I sat with his dad and told him where to turn. His dad kept asking us questions on the way. What were they doing? Why was there a chair on fire? They cut the cow's throat? How many were there? What did they look like? What were they driving? The last question stumped us. We hadn't seen any cars or trucks. The road was the only way in or out, and there was a creek that ran on the backside of the end of that particular road, so they couldn't have gone that direction. How did they get there with two recliners? When we got to that last stretch of road, the headlights found the spot where the recliner had been sitting. It was gone. We could all see where the road and surrounding grass was burned, but the recliner was not there. As we got closer, James noticed that the cow was gone too. I hate to admit, but I was getting scared all over again. I was afraid that his dad would tell us that it was our imagination and not believe us. When we got closer to the burnt spot in the road, Buster, James' dad, noticed the chair off in the ditch on the left side of the road. Then I noticed the cow on the other side. It was also in the ditch. The paper plates were all gone. Buster got out to look at the cow with the other men. They stood there talking and shaking their heads for what seemed like 10 minutes before getting back into the trucks. We continued toward the hill. The ruts made by spinning motorcycle tires were easily seen, but there was no fire on the other side of the hill. We all went down to where the other recliner had been burning, but it and the camp table were gone. You could see where someone had walked around the charred area and covered it with dirt. After we left, James saw a paper plate about 50 feet on the other side of the fence. Buster called the county sheriff when we got home, and by that time it was daylight and we went out again with the sheriff and a deputy. When we got back to the road, the first recliner and the cow were gone, but you could still see where something had been on fire and there was still blood on the road and in the grass. James showed them the shoe prints we'd seen. At the bottom of the hill, you could still see the charred area where the second recliner had been burning, and the deputy found the little scuff marks where the table had been sitting. At the end of the road, you could see where the top strand of the fence had been tugged down and wrapped around the lower strand so someone could crawl over it. You could also see where the grass and weeds had been trampled, providing a fairly easy trail to follow. We found a woman's tennis shoe on the other side of the creek. You could see where someone had climbed up the bank on the far side of the creek. We followed the trail all the way across the field up to the next dirt road. Again, the top wire was wrapped around the next lower wire, and there was a piece of red bandana looking material caught in it. There were marks on the road where 2 or 3 different cars had spun their tires when they left. Buster also found a large piece of glass that had blood on it. Buster filed a report for the missing cow. They'd found 4 more cows in the opposite direction from where me and James had gone. They never found the recliners or the missing cow. The sheriff called a few days later and told Buster that the blood on the glass was human and not bovine. It was his guess that the pitcher broke and someone cut their hand while carrying it back to their vehicles. 2 weeks after that, there was a huge scare in our community about some cult that had promised the area at large that they were going to kidnap someone and sacrifice them. Buster always said that it was just someone running their mouth after hearing about our incident. It was all anyone talked about that summer. Buster also said that he sure would like to know what happened to that cow. The story occurred in the summer of 2008. I grew up in Oregon and was acquainted with the outdoors at an early age. My favorite hobby came to be hiking, particularly in areas that are either very dangerous or isolated. The health benefits of hiking were secondary to the thrills of walking the edges of exposed cliffs, being in cougar and bear territory, knowing that I was very far away from help. Into the Wild was released in the fall of 2007, and I immediately fell in love. Being a high school senior, I could barely go another week living in my parents' house. The movie spoke to my sense of adventure and inspired me to hike the California portion of the Pacific Crest Trail upon graduation. I made it from the Mexico border to Northern California without much incident. I saw rattlesnakes and black bears, experienced dehydration, but nothing happened that made me fear for my life. Somewhere in the Lassen National Forest in northeastern California, I walked around a bend in the trail only to be startled by 2 people sitting on a rock dressed in nearly all white. Their faces were dirty, their appearance disheveled, and the man had a long unkempt beard. Both seemed to be in their 40s. What struck me as odd about the encounter was encountering anybody at all. I frequently went days without seeing a single human being. Their white clothes could be explained away by the need to escape the California summer sun. Their scruffy appearance could be explained away by the fact that most thru hikers abandoned personal hygiene on the trail. After I said hello, they said nothing and simply watched me as I passed. Even that I didn't find odd. I chalked it up to them being foreign and not knowing what to say. I camped a few hundred yards off the trail that night, as I always did. Following bare precautions, I hung the leftover food I had cooked that night from a tree approximately 5 feet off the ground. Packing up camp in the morning, I noticed the food wasn't there. I immediately thought a bear had entered my campsite, and so I began to look for paw prints. I didn't find paw prints, but I did find boot prints circling the campsite, 2 pairs of them. One of those prints led right up to the rope from which the food was hanging. I thought of the couple I had passed earlier and everything clicked. I quickly packed up and left. My mind was racing the entire day, but I figured the couple was simply hungry. If they had nefarious intentions, they would have come for more than food. Several days passed and my mind was at ease again. I had begun to circle my campsite with sticks to wake me in the event of an intruder, animal or otherwise. I awoke in my tent one night to the sound of those sticks crunching. I grabbed my hunting knife. I tried to relax by telling myself that in the middle of nowhere, the source of that noise is much more likely an animal than a person. Then I heard frantic whispering. It was impossible to tell which direction the voices were coming from. Being in the dark, surrounded by trees, 100 miles from the nearest city plays tricks on your senses. I debated yelling out claiming to have a gun, but instead decided to be silent and retain the benefit of surprise. I heard footsteps circling my tent and was ready to slash at whatever opened it. But just like that, it was over. No more footsteps, no more whispering. I lied frozen awake in my tent until sunrise and opened my tent to find nobody there. The only evidence something had actually happened were the boot prints, the same as before. Several more days passed and I was now in Shasta National Forest, probably 50 to 70 miles from where I first encountered the couple. The trail became more or less a goat trail, being on the side of a mountain and above the tree line. I could see the trail winding for miles in front of me and behind me. I stopped for water in the rare shade and noticed 2 hikers miles behind me. All I could see were 2 white dots moving along the mountainside. I immediately said out loud, "Screw this trip is over." I pulled out my map and looked for the nearest town, which appeared to be Castella, located off I-5. The only problem was that it was 25 miles away. I hiked well into the night trying to gain as much ground as possible. I kept losing the trail and decided to set up camp, this time far off the trail and into the forest. I got in my tent and tried to sleep, but every little noise kept me awake. After a few hours in my tent, I heard the telltale signs of another bad night. The footsteps, the whispering, the sticks breaking. Sounds travel far in the absence of other sound. I knew they were close, but wasn't sure how close. All I could think was, this is screwed up. This is so screwed up. Finally, a flashlight hits my tent. lights up the entire thing, and goes dark. I unzipped my tent and climbed out carrying my knife, yelling nonsense into the dark. Then I heard footsteps running towards the tent and barely made out a figure moving in my peripheral vision. I turned and ran deep into the forest. I tripped several times and ran into several trees. After running for approximately 5 minutes, I tripped, rolled, and came to rest next to a downed tree. I got under the tree trunk and laid still. I saw the flashlight moving around in the distance. I laid under that tree for hours. I was certain they were gone, but I didn't move. Eventually, birds started chirping and I knew sunrise would come soon. Once it did, I made my way back to the trail, abandoned my campsite, and walked the rest of the distance to Castella, where the Pacific Crest Trail crosses I-5. I hitchhiked my way to the town of Mount Shasta and spoke with the police and Forest Service. They put me in a motel for the night, and my parents drove from Oregon to pick me up the next day. I followed up with the police and Forest Service months later, who told me there had been similar reports of items disappearing from campsites throughout the surrounding national forest. However, there have been no other reports of the terrorizing that I experienced. As far as I know, nothing ever came of the couple. This happened in the fall of 1993, when I was 20 years old. In the interest of context, this was before I started college, and I was working in the material prep department of a plastics factory on the night shift. I was the only woman in the department, and my male coworkers were initially skeptical that I could handle the job, but I proved myself and earned their respect. It was hard work, but on the plus side, it also put me in the best shape of my life. I had just gotten off work, and it was about 1:30 a.m. My car was running on fumes, so I stopped at a local gas station to fill up. While I was pumping gas, a woman about my age approached me looking nervous and scared. She said that she had been at her boyfriend's house and they had a fight. She'd walk up to the gas station to use the payphone and call her to pick her up. On her way to the station, our car pulled up as she was walking and the guys inside started catcalling and harassing her. With a slight moving of her head, she indicated a car that was parked off to the side by the gas station dumpsters. I saw a large light green car, like a Caddy or a Lincoln, with at least 2 or 3 shadowy figures inside. She said they threatened her and she was too scared to call her friend and wait. The woman was neat, well dressed, and didn't seem high or drunk or anything like that. She just seemed really nervous and freaked out, so I didn't even hesitate. I finished pumping my gas and told her to hop in the car, then I'd take her home. At that time on a weeknight, there was little traffic, so I booked it right out of the gas station and asked her where she lived. She kept twisting around in the seat to see if the car was behind us, and when I asked her to put her seatbelt on, she ignored me and kept looking for the car. I assumed she was just scared. A few blocks down the road, however, I noticed she was looking around the car, and she started asking me about the money. "Where's your purse? Where's your bag? I need money. You need to give me some money." My stomach sank. I have this woman in my car and now she's gonna rob me. But when I thought about it, robbery just didn't make much sense. I was driving a 1985 Chevette and was wearing my work clothes, a ratty t-shirt and jeans with combat boots. I did not look like a person with a lot of cash, primarily because I wasn't a person with a lot of cash. She twisted around in the seat again and started yelling, "There they are, there they are." She didn't sound scared anymore. I checked the rear view and sure enough, the light green car is right behind me. She started cackling and bouncing up and down in the seat. "My boys are gonna screw you up. They're gonna screw you up." She's laughing like crazy, opening the glove box, looking in the back for a bag or purse, telling me all the messed up things these guys are planning to do to me. Now, if I had been smart, I would have just driven to the police station. Actually, if I had been very smart, I would have just called the cops from the gas station and waited with her until they arrived. That would have been the intelligent thing to do. Unfortunately, none of this crossed my mind until later. In the moment, I just got really angry. I realized 3 key things all at once. There was an intersection up ahead, with cars on either side waiting to cross, and the light had just turned yellow. I had a spare box cutter that I kept for work in the driver's side door compartment. The lady still had it put on her seatbelt. I didn't think. I floored it and passed under the yellow light just as it turned red. I glanced back to see if the green car was still behind me, but the cross traffic at the intersection had started to move, and they had it caught up. The woman started yelling. I slammed on the brakes and she hit the dash and windshield with a solid and viciously satisfying crack. When she rebounded to the passenger seat, I had the box cutter in her face and was screaming some serious stuff. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was along the lines of, get out of my car before I cut off your face and make you eat it." The crazy screaming and box cutter combo worked. She grabbed blindly at the handle and popped the door open, and I started shoving and punching her until she tumbled out the door to the curb. I stomped on the gas, got to the next turn, and squealed around it with the passenger door still open. I made a few more turns because I was afraid that the green car might catch up to me. After a little while, I stopped to close the passenger door, and then I cut across town and got onto the highway to go home. I was on the highway for about 5 minutes before the shake started. I pulled off to the shoulder to calm down to get my act together, and then I drove home. I told my older sister. I was living with her temporarily after the breakup with my ex. She grabbed me in a tight bear hug while simultaneously yelling about how stupid I was for not going to the police. I've never been so glad to be yelled at in my life. I've lived most of my life way out in the valley countryside of Ontario. Given it's not a whole lot for an 18-year-old, but for me it's the only place I can call home, and I like to think that I know the entire area, as far as sprawling that is, like the back of my hand. Adventures across the long, cross-crossing roads, pastures, and woods that made up the skeleton of my village were a common venture in my childhood. As a young kid, I had a habit of biking extremely far out in hopes of finding new places, and sometimes my dad or one of my friends' parents would toss out bikes in their pickup and take us way out into a back road and let us explore for a few hours. This was how a lot of us first found that on one of these bad gravel roads, surrounded by thin woods, was a worn down old shack sitting just about 20 meters off of the path. Honestly, I never thought anything of it, except for the fact that it was creepy. It had no windows to see inside, and I never went anywhere near it. But one of my friends at the time said that her older sister had tried to go in it and that the door was always locked. We all had better things to do than to be curious about that at the time anyway, so I quickly moved on and became nothing more than a mundane landmark of that area. Honestly, I had completely forgotten about it for a few years now. Except last Tuesday, I was coming home from one of my very late classes at my university, and I usually take the back routes I used many years ago, as they're more straightforward and never have any sort of traffic. As I drove down the gravel path that would wind along the side of the country and eventually take me to the next street I needed to turn onto, I noticed a faint glinting coming from within the trees up ahead, maybe about 100 meters from my car. A flashlight? I thought, but as my car came closer, I realized what I was really seeing. The light inside of the shack was on. I should mention now that in all of the nearly 13 years I've spent living in my area, I have never seen that door open, and I've never seen a light on inside of that shack, ever. Not even once. I must have driven past that shack probably almost 100 times in my life, but this was the first time I'd ever seen any sign of a person's presence having been anywhere near that thing. That, coupled with the fact that it was 10 o'clock at night and pitch black outside aside from my own headlights, and the faint glow lighting up the door frame up ahead, immediately filled me with what I can only describe as a weird sense of dread. Fortunately, while my car approached the light, I was curious enough that despite the feeling in my stomach, I slowed down as I was about to pass, hoping that I could see what was going on inside, and this is probably the only reason I managed to spot the dark shape that burst out of the foliage on the side of the road, directly into my path. I wasn't going very fast at that point, but I still pounded the brakes rather hard in alarm, so my car came to a crunching stop on the gravel. For a moment, I was just really confused and freaked out. What was that? Had I almost hit a deer or something? This far out in the country, a deer would have been the most likely and most reasonable assumption, but in the beams of my car, I could see what had stopped me. A very tall, a very lanky old man with scraggly and balding gray hair. He looked dirty and unkempt, and as his clothes hung off of him, I felt extremely unsettled over what this guy could be doing way out here, and why he had walked out in front of my car. As I sat there confused, the old man came around to my window and knocked on the glass. I rolled down the window just a crack, only enough for someone to be able to hear me and for me to hear them. I was already creeped out enough as it was. Immediately, I had to say what I was thinking. What are you doing out here? In my peripheral vision, I could still see the light from the shack, but in my mind's eye, I wasn't really registering it anymore. Stupid, I know. I should have made the connection immediately, but I was still kind of shaken by the fact that I could have run this guy over if I hadn't been able to stop in time, and being a new driver and all, the thought of that was terrifying. After a small pause, the man started talking to me. He had a thick, croaky sort of voice, and he spoke very slowly. "My truck, it's broken," he explained. Oh, okay. I was also getting the feeling that he wasn't really all there, mentally. I didn't have to look around to notice there wasn't any truck on the side of the road, but I did anyway, turning my head around to confirm what I already knew. There was definitely no truck. Had he somehow driven it into the trees or something? As far as I could remember and see, there wasn't enough space anywhere in them for a truck to fit through. What was the man talking about? While I was looking, it was honestly as though I could feel that he was watching me, and when I turned back, he was still leaning down to peer inside of my window at me. Where? I don't see it. I was definitely distrustful of this guy already. At first, he didn't respond, and my nerves were only getting worse the longer we were alone out here. Then he replied, "It's just up the road," he said, turning just to point with his finger in that general direction. The lights on my car aren't exactly the greatest, but I could still see far enough that I really couldn't imagine where on earth this truck was supposed to be. I couldn't spot the faintest sight of it. While I squinted up ahead, he continued, "I'll show you where, if you come." At this point, I really had no idea what this old man was thinking I could do to help. I'm just an 18-year-old girl. I don't exactly look like the type of person who knows a lot about cars or how to fix them. And for the record, I'm really not. But I was tired from a long day at school, so I absolutely was not at my brightest. And for some reason, a part of me felt guilty about leaving him out here alone if his truck really was broken. Okay, I said, and I reached to my gear shift to start driving slowly up the road. But as soon as he saw my hand, he shook his head. Just walk, it's not too far. What? Excuse me, but no thanks. How was I going to see anything in the dark if I got out of my car and followed him anyway? There was no harm in driving wherever he was trying to lead me. The more I talked to the guy, the more unnerved I was getting, and the more red flags were starting to pop up in my mind. I couldn't see a car anywhere, and this total stranger wanted me to get out of mine and follow him into the dark on this creepy road in the middle of nowhere. No, I'd rather drive to it, I responded. I could see his brow furrow, and he looked kind of agitated. He insisted, your car won't fit in the trees anyway. So, did his truck crash then? Why the trees, if we were going up the road? I remembered what I'd just been thinking a minute earlier about there not being enough space, and I asked him, then how did yours get in the trees? The only logical explanation would have been that his truck had swerved off the road, but even if that were the case, there was seriously nothing at all that I could have done to help him fix his car or get it back out again. The entire situation was beginning to make me very scared. There was a lengthy enough pause between my question and him speaking up that I was beginning to think that he didn't hear me or something. So I asked again, still no immediate answer. When he finally did reply, he was staring at me directly in the eyes. You really don't look old enough to drive. I hear comments like this a lot, since I do look very young because of my size. Normally, somebody would say this with a smile or something to signify that this is, in fact, meant to be taken as a joke, but this guy's face didn't change even slightly. He just kept staring at me with a completely cold expression. That type of remark in this kind of situation immediately had my heart racing, and all I could think was, what did this guy want from me? What I wanted to say next was, well, who are you? But instead, I anxiously fumbled for my phone in my pocket, babbling in a way that probably made it really obvious I was completely freaked out of my mind. Okay, I could just call someone to come help you out. There's not really anything I can do. As I said that, it occurred to me to wonder, did this old guy not have a cell phone of his own? I know not every older person has one, even if they're becoming much more common, but seriously. And then I also remembered, with a sudden streak of massive fear, the shack with the light on. I could still see the light coming from it just up ahead in the trees. My dumb brain finally put two and two together. The old man hadn't even mentioned it at all. It was like it wasn't even there to him, and there was definitely no one out there that could have turned the light on but the guy who was just standing outside my car right now. What was he doing out here in the shack then, which had been locked for all these years by someone I never knew? There was definitely no truck around here. He wanted me out of my car for a whole nother reason. I think maybe the old man must have seen on my face that I was scared out of my wits and about to book it out of there. Instead of any words, without warning, his face contorted with rage, and he swung his fist, pounding against it my window with enough strength to make it shudder. His eyes were wide and he looked furious and completely insane. Even though I was panicking more than I ever had in my life, and I was sure he was about to smash the window in if he tried again, I screamed, threw my phone onto the floor, switched gears, and slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. I hurtled down the road, and when I glanced into my rearview mirror, I saw his dark shape turn from standing in the road, and I watched as he turned, and he walked off the road, directly back towards the light of the shack. I didn't slow down at all until I was nearly home, and absolutely sure that there was no way that he could have followed me. When I got home that night, I spent a long time crying about what had happened with my mom. And though I don't think she believed all of what I told her, we don't have the greatest relationship, she called up everyone she knew to ask if anyone knew the old man, or if they knew who owned that shack. In a town like ours, just about everyone knows each other, but no one had any clue who he was. One of our family friends even swore that he was sure it's been abandoned for at least 4 years now. And since most people don't usually take that road, no one said that they've ever seen a light on or the door open but me. I've been taking a different route home from school since, and I really don't think I ever want to head back down that road. Creepy guy in the shack, please, let's not meet again. This happened when I was in college. I lived in Isla Vista, the student community at UCSB, notorious for being a party school. It fully lived up to its reputation. I liked to party, but wow, these people were off the wall. As such, there were a lot of people who put themselves in dangerous situations, drinking to excess, not being careful, not locking doors, etc. It had a very isolated and insular vibe, and anyone who was hanging around who wasn't college-aged immediately looked out of place and strange. One night after having a few drinks, I came home to my small house where I lived with 2 other girls, probably around 2:30 a.m. We were all serious students. I was probably the least serious actually, and we partied, and it was not your typical UCSB mega rager, more like a small get-together with friends. We would often have a few people spend the night, sleep in our furniture, or in our beds as this case may be. That night, my roommates had a few people over who I didn't know, and I saw when I returned home that one of them had opted to sleep on the couch from the shadow that I saw there. I didn't turn the light on so I wouldn't wake anyone up, but as I was passing the couch to enter my bedroom, I noticed that the figure was lying very stiff. He just had this weird energy to him. He was lying down, but it was like he was putting all of his energy into lying as still and rigid as possible. I paused, and the guy quickly jerked his head to face me, without moving his limbs. So quickly that it startled me. I could see his wide open eyes glinting in the dark. Figuring that I'd startled him, or that he was drunk, or maybe on some kind of stimulant and unable to sleep, I just hurried past into my bedroom and locked the door. The dude made me so nervous, and I wasn't taking any chances. I fell asleep. At 4:30 a.m., I woke up. There was a strange sound at the door, almost like somebody was drumming their fingers against the wood very quietly. I lay still and listened. There were more quiet sounds like someone scratching the door with their fingers, which got louder and louder until it was clear that he was using both hands and scratching as fast and as hard as possible. It created an extremely loud and intimidating sound that filled me with fear. I got my cell phone and texted my roommate because I was afraid to make a sound. "Your friend is freaking me out. Is he coked out? Can you talk to him? He's banging and scratching on my door." She didn't text me back, probably because she was asleep. I texted my other roommate to the same effect, covering all of my bases. Keep in mind that the scratching has been going on at this point for a couple minutes. I have no idea how he could have sustained it. Scratching a wooden door with your fingernails can't feel good. He also grabbed at the knob and jiggled it super forcefully. Because neither of them answered, I decided to call and really wake them up, though I was scared to make a sound. I know it sounds stupid, but there was something seriously horrifying about being teased like this through the door. I knew that he was trying to terrify me. I felt like a little kid, but I could tell this guy was screwed up or something, and maybe the police needed to be called, and I wanted to loop my roommates in since it was one of their friends. The scratching stopped abruptly, and I called my roommate, who answered sleepily. "Yo, your friend is messed up. Can you please deal with it? Do we need to call the cops? He's seriously scaring me and he was scratching at my bedroom door. He's really weird." She didn't say anything for several seconds, and when she did speak, her voice had no sleepiness in it at all. "What friend?" she said. "That guy that was sleeping on the couch," I said. She was quiet again. "We didn't have any guys over," she said. "Call the police." My adrenaline surged and I told her to please lock the bedroom door as quickly as possible. I realized that I hadn't heard scratching in a while, and I had no clue where the dude had gone. Suddenly, I heard a loud banging in the other end of the house, where my roommates, Lauren and Monica, shared a bedroom. The bangs were followed by the sound of them screaming in fear. I quickly dialed the police as this maniac proceeded to bang against the, luckily, locked bedroom door of my two roommates as they screamed. The heaviness of the blows left no doubt that he was trying to break the door down. I told the 911 operator the situation and she dispatched 2 squad cars. The police in Isla Vista are generally used to peeling drunks off the sidewalk and breaking up brawls. This was really serious and strange, and I think the dispatcher got the sense from my tone how terrified I was. She stayed on the phone with me. At one point the banging stopped and everything was quiet for a while. I talked with the dispatcher and suddenly looked down to see that this guy had slipped his fingers through the 1-inch gap between my door and the floor was just kind of waggling them around, making this weird growling sound. I screamed and backed away, which is my biggest regret about the situation, since when I look back at it, it would have been so awesome to just stomp his fingers and hear the guy howl in pain. When the cops rolled up, I heard running and the sound of our sliding glass door opening and closing, and then he was gone. The cops never caught him. He had broken in through our side door by jimmying the lock somehow. My door was covered in what turned out to be huge gashes he'd made using a pair of scissors, which he discarded on the ground before he left. What terrifies me the most about this was that I walked right past him. I looked him right in the face. I realized now that he was not trying to sleep or on drugs, but was lying so stiff like that because he was hiding. He probably heard me open the door and freaked out because he hadn't realized there was another girl living there and tried to blend into the couch in the darkness. This story takes place in August of 2013 in the mountains of southern Oregon. I'm a USAF Security Forces Airman, military police. My girlfriend was at work, and as a sweltering hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to go explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used, and many totally forgotten and grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days off starting on roads that we knew, finding roads we didn't know, driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating back to paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on, and began the drive into the mountains. After driving for around an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange. It was much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove was unsettling. Also, it was nearly impossible to see far into the trees as aspens grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, only about 5'5". Regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would not have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small one-man tent was set back in the trees, about 50 feet from the strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread, and felt certain that there was someone in the tent, and if we could see the tent, they could see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area, but we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in the tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it, all the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp, should we need to leave in a hurry. He would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up with my senses on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over. No fire had been built, no wood collected. The tent was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling, "Let's go, let's get out of here." Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men. A third person was laying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we had come from. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. I called the state police, and they promised to send a trooper out to check out the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the woman's clothing were all gone, though he could tell people had been in the area. The strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I have not returned to the area and do not intend to. Okay, so I've had a few issues with my next door neighbors since I moved in, but nothing creepy until just recently. There is a man, a woman, and at least one boy living there, and I mostly just avoid them. The man seems okay but a bit weird, and the boy just keeps to himself, and the woman is quite a bit off. Not long after we moved in, she left a note in my mailbox. Our mailboxes are right beside each other, between our houses. Anyway, I stood at the mailbox reading the note. She thought that my dog was using the bathroom in her yard. It was possible, as our fence had some holes in it, that our dog had gotten out then, but those holes had been fixed a long time ago. Still, no big deal, except I noticed her standing in her driveway, just staring at me, and the note was very long. I just kept reading it. The more I read it, the crazier it got, and the weirder her behavior in my peripheral vision became. Apparently I was entitled. She seemed to think I was somehow instructing my dog to use the bathroom in their yard. Her note went on a tangent about how awful dogs are. She was also 100% convinced it was my dog, even though there are always tons of loose dogs, cats, and wildlife wandering around and no doubt traveling through her unfenced backyard. In my peripheral vision, she got into her SUV, backed out of her driveway, then parked it along the street directly behind me and just idled there, staring. The note then went on a weird, long tirade about the previous family to live in my house, saying I was Antherdeb, as if I'd have any idea at all what that is even supposed to mean, then concluded in some odd insults and some implied not quite threats. This is the closest thing we ever had to a conversation at this point. I can understand not wanting a dog using the bathroom in her yard, but this was a bit of an extreme reaction, as this was literally the first time I'd even heard of there being a problem. A simple note would have done, but this note was insane. She was still staring behind me. I decided to try to ignore her and just go to my house. That's when she shouted out her window, "Are you playing a game?" The reaction made no sense. "Are you nuts?" I replied, as I officially ran out of patience. She shouted more nonsense and insults at me while blocking my driveway, which is right next to the mailboxes, with her vehicle, while I repeatedly told her to leave before I called the cops. This went back and forth like this for a while, but she eventually sped off when I pulled my cell phone out. Later, my boyfriend, who had not been home at this time this happened, had a chat with the neighbors. He said they seemed agreeable and reasonable and basically dismissed me of just being dramatic. The woman told a very different version of events, of course. I was annoyed that my boyfriend wasn't taking me seriously, but let it go. I think he just wanted to keep getting along with the man next door, as they sometimes borrow tools. They speak to him a lot differently than how they speak to me. They don't do anything rude to me while he's around. In fact, they don't speak to me when he's around at all. They always wait for him to be away. Anyway, I mostly just avoid them. Sometimes, the woman stares at me, but I just ignore her. Until recently, I've been mostly successful. Here's the creepy story. I don't sleep well at night when I'm home alone, and I'm always home alone now because my boyfriend is out of the country on business for months at a time. I often feel like there's someone just outside my house or at my door. Sometimes, my dogs act up at odd hours, but I never see anyone. I keep my house alarm armed and my pistol on my nightstand. The other night was one such night. I didn't sleep well and kept having a sinking feeling that something was wrong. Anyway, I got out of bed at about 2 a.m. because I thought I was scheduled to work at 3 a.m. I had mostly given up on getting a restful sleep then anyway. As I left my house, I heard something to my left, the direction of my neighbor's house, but didn't see anything. I was always nervous in my driveway because the motion sensor light was broken, but there was always a lot of darkness between my door and my truck, so I always moved quickly to my driveway. I got in my truck and went to work. It turned out that I misread my schedule and didn't work at 3 that morning after all. Annoyed at the mistake, but grateful I'd get to go home and sleep a little more before the actual start of my shift at 7, I went home. I pulled into my driveway and didn't see anything in the beam of my truck's headlights. I always look around my truck before getting out. I turned the headlight off and got out. I took a few steps ahead of my truck, and then all of a sudden a large man called out to me, shouted really, from the shadows at the corner of my house. He scared me so bad that I screamed, reached for my pepper spray, and fell down. Not useful. He apologized in a tone that didn't sound sorry at all. It was my neighbor, and that wasn't much of a relief. Apparently it was my fault that he occasionally found trash in his yard, in windy Colorado. Complaining about this seemed to be a lot more important issue than scaring the heck out of me while I'm alone at night. He showed no real concern or realization that was even wrong at all. Again, I have no problem with neighbors bringing issues to my attention, but seriously, hey, can you make sure trash from your bins isn't blown into my yard? Is not a question that takes 10 minutes. Nor is it one that needs to be addressed at 3 in the morning. I'm not in agreement to keep the peace, but I know the trash isn't mine. We live in a windy area. Trash gets blown around in people's yards all the time. No big deal. But he would just not stop going on about it. He kept needlessly repeating himself and made some not quite but kinda threat about getting along. Think about the lines of, "It would be a shame if something were to happen," type sort of threats. He was keeping me busy. I didn't even notice his wife flank me. Before I even knew she was there, she appeared from the shadows by a tree. She wanted to yell at me about some eggs. A few weeks ago, I found a bunch of eggs smashed on the road near our shelved mailbox. As the carton was right next to them, I thought the carton had obviously just been dropped, not that someone was trying to egg anything. I assumed my neighbor had dropped the eggs on her way to get the mail and just left them. She denies this, but I still think that's the most likely explanation because no one else has any reason to be out at our mailbox with eggs. But I didn't care enough to say anything to her about it at the time, so I just let it go and forgot all about it. Now she was accusing me of leaving eggs around. Again, inexplicably expressing the grievance at 3 a.m. Weird that she hadn't brought it up weeks ago when it happened, but I know why she didn't. My boyfriend was still here then. My boyfriend has been away on business for several weeks now, long enough for them to have noticed his absence. They were also probably aware that my motion sensor light was out. They sure seemed to know how to avoid my headlight beams. Being surprisingly patient, I explained that I knew nothing about the eggs. I mentioned that I later found a lot of the shells in my yard and figured a squirrel must have carried them there. She proudly informed me that she tossed them onto my yard herself. Apparently she thought that was okay, but someone dropping them in the first place isn't. Anyway, this is where I started to get over my shock a bit and started getting pissed. Initially, I had been somewhat relieved that the man in the shadows had been my neighbor, not some random crazy person, but now I was pissed. I had now been outside with them for like 20 minutes, while they accused me about stupid stuff. while I tried to be polite and agreeable even though I had nothing to do with it. But now everything wrong with the situation had just kicked in. I eventually remembered that I don't actually have to put up with any of this and cut her off mid-rant and said, "It's 3 a.m, I'm going home, good night," and turned on my heel. I heard her say something in an unkind tone as I left, but didn't catch what it was. They had staked out my house, waited for my boyfriend to leave, and long enough to be sure he was gone, all to complain about some insane stuff long after it supposedly even happened. If they have concerns, surely there are better times to address them than at 3 a.m. What were they doing out at 3 a.m. anyway? And that man had totally purposely hidden a shadow at the corner of my house where he could avoid my headlights, and didn't reveal himself until I was out of my truck and exposed. And shouldn't the woman have walked up beside her husband, not gone around while I was distracted? They kept doing odd behavior, never enough that they're doing anything illegal or anything to report the police. But none of this is normal behavior. Honestly, I think these complaints are just excuses and they're really just taking the opportunity to intimidate me. I think they're messing with me on purpose. Then again, I could be wrong. Either way, I will be installing a motion light soon. I was so shaken up and had my adrenaline so high from someone scaring me from a blind spot by my house. Because seriously, that could have been someone else and a whole lot worse. The story starts several years ago. Me and my friend's interest in urban exploration. I was a junior in high school at the time, which was when everyone started to earn a lot more freedom, so we took the chance to be out late whenever we could. Now, keep in mind that I live in a major city in central Colorado, so the nightlife is never lacking. We could always find something to do, and were especially drawn if there was an element of danger. We wouldn't always plan these trips, but we made sure that if we're going into any old building in the dark, we would have a knife and a flashlight for safety. We never really had to defend ourselves, but we came very close one evening. It must have been around November, because there wasn't yet snow on the ground, but it was actually a chilly evening. Directly across the street from the abandoned hospital, which we have hypothesized is still around from the TB area, is a hospital that is newer and in use. The two are connected by an underground tunnel, which I can only assume was a way to move bodies without alerting the patients. We had been inside the hospital a few times, but never found anything strange, only the occasional sign of others having been or lived there. What was piquing our interest that night was the abandoned library next door to the hospital. It was connected, but only by exterior walls. To get inside, you could not cut through the hospital, but instead had to hop over a tall wall and climb a very high fence. A few of us had backpacks, containing the aforementioned safety precautions and a couple bottles of water, so nothing too heavy or valuable that would get damaged when tossed over the obstacles before us. A little ways off the road, it was dark if you clung to the buildings. We did for a while before stepping behind a small patch of shrubbery, which we determined was an easy way over the first wall since the other way around to gain access was by a chained, unclimbable gate at the bottom of a set of stairs facing away from the ledge. Both were parallel with the library, so when tucked back in that corner behind the bushes, no one could see us from the street. I don't believe I went first, but I did not remain behind to be last over that wall. It was too high up for me to jump and haul myself over, so I resorted to stepping on a pipe jutting out somewhere lower along the wall. It gave me a bit of a needed boost, and soon I was up and over, moving into the library's courtyard. Another girl and I waited for our 2 other girlfriends to join us. Upon an initial glance over at the courtyard, there was no obvious way in. To our right was a dilapidated fountain, which I took joy in imagining springing forward a spray of water from its detailed stonework in the brighter summer months, people laughing and talking with the surrounding trees bringing them shade. Now, however, it had been in long disuse, and the earth at our feet was cold and hard. There were no signs of another soul for years, save the 15 chain link fence directly in front of us separating the courtyard in half. I could tell it hadn't seen the same weather as the rest of the courtyard, because the metal showed no signs of rust. That must be our way in, we agreed, because with a fence like that, someone obviously wanted to keep us out. We hurled our bags over the fence, hearing them clank on the ground rather silently due to their lightness. I was the third over, because I have a slight fear of climbing and it took me a bit to mentally prepare myself. I made it to the top of the fence in short time, then sat at the top straddling it with a leg on either side. I had 2 girls on the other side in front of me, and one behind me who was telling me to hurry up. I spent a good couple minutes up there doing another mental preparation and some deep breathing, then climbed down to wait for the last girl. At the time, I was thinking that had been one of the scariest things I've done in a while, because I tend to avoid climbing at all costs. Of course, this is an irrational fear, as I have never fallen, but that phobic fear didn't even compare to what happened next. The last girl's feet hit the ground and all 4 of us split up into the smaller half of the courtyard, looking for any kind of entrance. We decided that breaking a window would be too loud and draw unwanted attention, not to mention we could really get cut up, so that wasn't an option. Searching for a little longer, we didn't find anything that looked remotely plausible, until we found a grate near the base of where two walls met. I couldn't believe we hadn't noticed it before, and upon closer inspection, the grate was already moved slightly from its resting place, so it would be easy to lift the rest of the way. The smallest and least fearful of our group went first. After moving the grate, there was a small drop down. It was no more than 3 feet down and 2 feet wide, but inside there was another drop down where we could see into the library basement. She hopped down into the small, square landing, only to almost immediately freeze. We looked amongst ourselves, wondering what was wrong. "There's a guy down there," she said. "What? Where?" "I could see his outline," she said. I leaned forward and tried to make out a shape, but it was further down than my line of sight and it was too dark. "Hello?" she called out. He responded the same, asking who we were. "Just a couple of chicks," she spat out bluntly. What he said next sent chills down my spine, and it was as if I could feel the darkness radiating out of the hole in the ground. All of a sudden, it was very still and quiet, like the darkness had spilled out and weighed all of us down in that gloomy courtyard. He said in what I can only describe as a lustful tone gripping with ill intent, "I'm addicted to following the sound of women's voices." My friend looked over at us blankly, but there was nervousness underneath. Unease. Something in his voice sounded like it wasn't an empty threat, like he wasn't just saying something creepy to get us to leave. She looked back to where he was and said slowly, "That's not cool." The man under that dark earth began laughing maniacally, and not in the kind of way a really good actor does, in the way that we could feel his utter insanity hit us like stale air. We looked at each other for what felt like hours in that gloomy courtyard, but I knew it was only a couple seconds, because we all exchanged without even speaking that we had to get out of there. And now, I was not about to risk some crazy guy coming after us, even if we did outnumber him. The friend scrambled up out of the landing, and I was never over a fence faster in my life. 15-foot potential fall, and I didn't even have time to think about it. We didn't stop running until we were on the street and halfway down the block out of breath. "So guy that was down there, let's not meet again." It was 2012, and my best friend Hannah had convinced me to join her on a weekend trip up north. She had, after searching for the longest time, found her dream car and was planning on traveling the 900-kilometer to the very north of Sweden to buy it. It was a second-hand door Suzuki Vitara in a purplish kind of color, and I must admit I didn't share her obsession with it. But with her being the closest thing to a sister that I will ever get, I was happy to join her nonetheless. Hannah and I have always had each other, from the cradle and onwards. Sharing each other's love for adventure, we have traveled the world together. At the time this happened, we were both 21 and had recently returned from a trip in Asia. The man who was selling her the car had agreed to meet us at the small airport in Umeå. When we arrived shortly before lunchtime, it had started to snow heavily. The first snow of the season, no less. The parking lot was almost empty, and when I saw the man standing outside the Vitara, I felt immediately concerned. He was dressed like a hunter. A lot of people in this area of the country live a lifestyle with hunting and fishing, so nothing strange with that really. But still, there was something about him that made me uneasy. He was nice though, smiling and waving to us, shaking hands with us both before walking us around the car and pointing all the tiny little flaws. He showed us the work he had done on the car and showed the paperwork from the recently done engine repairs. He made the impression that he didn't want to hide anything. On the contrary, he made a show out of being very forthcoming and honest. The snowing had now intensified and we were getting cold. He opened the car door for us and said, "I got the paperwork at home. Let's close the deal over some coffee." Against all my instincts, I climbed in after Hannah, both of us now trapped in the back seat. I had no reason to feel threatened by this man who had been nothing but pleasant to us, other than the alarm bells going off inside my head. I can't tell what it was that made me feel that way, but there must have been some sign that something was wrong, something that my subconscious tuned to. The man was constantly talking. He showed the stereo, told us about the features of the car, about the places we drove past, about the wildlife and the nature. There was not a silent moment. After about 20 minutes, I started to notice that we were in no way moving in the direction of civilization. Instead, it seemed we were driving further and further into the vast wilderness. It struck me that he had us in the back of a two-door car, diving us into unknown territory, and no one knew where we were. I looked at Hannah, who was happily listening to the man telling stories about the area, and I noticed she didn't look at all worried. Maybe I was totally overreacting. We drove past a group of people standing by the side of the road, hunters planning their day or taking a break maybe. This truly is very different Sweden compared to the city. The car finally stopped outside a small wooden cottage with no neighboring houses, apart from a small cabin that we drove past a few hundred meters down the road, but it had looked empty. We followed the man inside. He was still talking non-stop and continued to do so until the moment the door closed behind us. Hannah kept asking things about the car, and I could sense that her voice had a new undertone now, a thin, sharp tenseness that made me wonder if she too had started to feel that something wasn't right. "I'll put the kettle on," he said, and as he passed us to go into the kitchen, he let his hand touch Hannah's hair and he smiled smugly. "May I use the bathroom?" I asked politely and made my way to the door with a little red heart on. I was washing my hands when I saw something in the stained bathroom mirror. Something was behind the water cistern. I pulled out a rolled up plastic folder and as I turned the pages, I felt my blood run cold. It was very violent pictures that looked like had been cut out from magazines, and they were glued to the paper, surrounded by cut up pieces of handwritten text. Put it together made a horrifying story about how a woman was lured into a car with the promise of getting to buy the car cheaply, and then it quickly turned into a horror story. I knew this will sound silly, but when we traveled together, Hannah and I had a code word for whenever we felt it was time to get out of a situation. We had never needed to use it, just joked about it, but now it came in handy. I walked out of the bathroom and looked at Hannah and said, "Potatoes. We forgot to buy potatoes. And that's too bad, because we really need some." The look on my face must have told her that the situation was no joke, and she said, "Oh, should we get some as soon as possible?" "The sooner the better," I replied. Hannah, always pretty and charming and capable of great acting, casually walked over to the man in the kitchen, tapped his shoulder and said, "Excuse me, but I was wondering if I can go have a quick look at the cam belt." He huffed something about it being in good shape and handed over the keys. We got into the car and speeded off faster than the weather strictly speaking allowed. We left the car at the airport and hoped we hadn't made a terrible mistake. What if he reported it stolen? It would be embarrassing to explain to the police. But nothing happened. He didn't follow us, didn't report it. We had to take the train since we had no plane tickets. The original plan had been to take the car home, and we didn't want to linger closer to the airport in case he came looking for us. Later, Hannah asked what made me use the code word, and I told her about what I had found. It might have just been a fantasy, a sick game, and maybe he would never done anything to us. But right then and there, I was convinced we would have died if we didn't get out. I'm glad Hannah didn't need any convincing or proof, just the code word. I truly think that if we hadn't talked about it so many times before, about how we would handle a situation where we need to get out fast, things would have ended differently. Both of us knew that either of us ever used the code word, it's time to get out, no questions asked, just move. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This happened to me 2 years ago. It was my first month on the job, and I worked night security at this pretty interesting place. I'm a 38-year-old male. I've worked security jobs most of my life and the graveyard shift. I was an event security guard for various well-known concert venues for years, so I've seen my fair share of strange things and crazy people. The place I currently work is a resort-style apartment complex. To get the layout, there are 3 floors of apartments with 50 units on each floor. This place takes up one city block with a golf course in the back, indoor swimming pools, hot tubs, and a small movie theater. You name it, this place has it. Most of the residents are retired doctors, lawyers, and otherwise rich. There are some younger people that live here as well, stockbrokers, and real estate agents and so on. Some just use their apartment in the summer and leave as soon as the snow falls. It is located in a well-known tourist town in the United States. The building itself has 12 exits on the first floor. The doors are locked at 11 p.m. You can exit, but you can't get back in unless you go to the front of the building and ask to be buzzed in or pick up the call box phone next to whatever exit you are at. It will ring the company's cell phone and I answer and can come let you in. The front lobby is set up much like a hotel, with sliding glass doors which I lock when I start my shift. In the middle of the building on first floor are 2 big slider doors which I also lock. They lead to the private parking lot. The parking lot itself is gated and you need a code to get in. This was midsummer, and while it's never really hot here, tonight was an exception. It was still very warm after the sun had set. I came in 10 minutes to 11 to start my shift. We have a routine to hand off the keys, event log, and phone to the next person on duty. Despite its size, I am the only security person here at night. A coworker who was leaving told me the side iron gates that led to the parking lot are open on one side because they are stuck. This is nothing new and they often do get jammed. She told me the repair people would be in tomorrow, sometime to fix them, but to do just some extra patrol out here tonight. This place sits across the road from a public park, and while the area is pretty decent, the park tends to bring in homeless at night who sometimes like to try and wander on the property or cause trouble. My night started out as uneventful. As a security guard in this place, we only have pepper spray, a large flashlight, keys, and a company cell phone to call 911 if need be. We are told not to confront with bodily harm, nor can we detain anyone. We are simply eyes and ears and to call the police if something comes up. Of course, you could defend yourself if you need to, but in all cases if you are in danger, call the police is the company policy. Basically, I am to walk the grounds and floors for anyone suspicious. watch the cameras in the security office, which is in the lobby, and otherwise try to stay alert. If a resident calls for a maintenance request, I would take the information down in the computer for a day shift, or if a resident called with a security issue, I would attend to it. Pretty easy enough job, I thought. I locked the doors to the parking lot and the lobby doors. I did a sweep of all the floors and then found myself back at the desk. It was really quiet and it rolled around to 3 a.m. I had just sat down to eat my food when the company's cell phone rang. The caller ID let me know it was from one of our outside call box phones. I picked it up and said, "Thanks for calling. Resort name here. This is Security Officer James. How can I help you?" All I heard was someone breathing heavy. I glanced at the cameras and could see the shadow of a figure standing just out of reach from the door in camera view. All I could see is the open call box and the metal cord from the phone. I again asked, "How can I help?" The man started to breathe heavier and laughed in silence. I got up from my chair and started to walk out of the office into the door he was at when it rang again, this time from call box number 2, which was further down. I quickly looked at the camera and saw this large figure in a hooded jacket. I knew this was strange as it was very warm outside. He was holding a black bag in his hands but had his back to the camera. "I'm coming for you," they said in this raspy, deep tone. He hung up before I had the chance to say anything. Then the phone rang again. This time I picked up and before he could speak, I let him know the cops are on their way and to leave the property now as he is on camera. He tried the doors and both were locked. This time he was at yet another call box. The guy had to be running at top speed to make it to the next and the next call box as they were a good distance between doors on the outside. "I can see you. The cops won't make it much here in time," they said. I spoke loud and pretended like I was talking to another security officer and asked him to send 3 other security guards to such and such location and that police are dispatched. The guy slammed the phone down loud against the call box receiver and I watched him on camera take off into the darkness to the park area. I figured it scared him off. I was going to call the police, but honestly the location of this place, it would take them at least 15 minutes to get here and I figured this guy was just some homeless guy from the park. I scanned the cameras and walked the back lot just to be sure no one was there. I had my pepper spray in my hands just in case, but no one was out there. I returned to my desk and wrote what happened in the incident log. But a half hour passed, I had finished my food and was just about to do rounds when the phone rang again. This time it was from an unknown number. I thought it would be a resident calling for a repair issue or something. I picked up and said my normal line, then I heard, "Where are the cops? I don't see them, but I see you," the voice said. It was that guy again. I scanned the cameras and did not see anything. I went to the front door to look out there. There was nothing but darkness and a few front floodlights on. "I know you're alone," he said. I basically told him to get screwed and hung up. I called the non-emergency number to 911 and let them know what was going on. The dispatcher said she would send out a car to check the area and make contact with me. The next thing I hear is a loud thud against the glass windows to the day manager's office, which sits across from the security room. Another 3 loud bangs. I run to the door and unlock it. I pull up the shades and shine my flashlight through the window into the darkness. I catch the face of this hooded man. He looked to be about 40 with long, stringy hair poking down and these wild eyes. He looked right at me and grinned before slamming his head into the window to try and break it. I started yelling at him and told him the cops are coming and to get out of here. That's when he pulled the biggest butcher knife I've ever seen and make a slicing motion like he would use it to cut my throat. The guy was crazy. He continued slamming his body against the glass trying to break it. He used his head to try and break the window but managed to bust his head open, so the window now had blood all over it. I backed out of the office and locked the door to it. I then decided to wait for cops as this guy was out of control and my pepper spray wasn't going to stop him, and the last thing I wanted was to handle a bloody crazy person. He then ran to the nearest side door and took the call box phone off the hook. He then ran to each call box and removed all the phones, which caused my company's cell phone to ring and jam up the line. This guy had to be on something because he ran as fast as I could imagine. I watched the camera and noticed to my horror, the sliding door to the garage was open. Now it was common for residents to go out to their cars and unlock the doors themselves. It's just a sliding lock like the kind in department stores, but this is the last thing I need with this guy running around. I sprinted across the building and took a shortcut through a couple banquet rooms to make it to the garage. As I was doing so, I saw that crazy guy running up the garage pathway. I slid that door as fast as I could and locked it before he got to the entryway. He then slammed his body into the glass, over and over, but the door did not move. I locked the second set of doors in case he got through the outside ones, he would at least be trapped or slow him down. I reached for my pepper spray, thinking maybe he would just leave and yell the cops are here. He started to laugh and howl and then held that knife up again before running to the darkness of the parking garages. I called the cops on my personal cell phone to let them know that the man has a knife. The dispatcher told me the cops will be there shortly and I let her know what happened. I made my way to the front again and locked myself in the security office. At least this place had no windows and I could watch on camera. I heard another loud thud and bang and realized he was at the front lobby doors trying to get in. I was hoping the cops would roll up any minute, but they didn't, and while it probably didn't take them long, it felt like forever at this point. The guy was standing at the lobby doors with a knife in hand. He faced the camera, and by this time his hood had fallen back. He was bald-headed with wild, long, stringy hair on the sides of his head. His eyes were huge, and I will never forget that grin on his face as he mouthed to the camera, "Die, die," while making stabbing motions with that knife. Blood running across his face from slamming it into the glass, he then ran out into the darkness. About 5 minutes later, the cops show up. They sent one officer. He asked me what the guy looked like, and I told him I have camera footage. He drove through the area first and shined a spotlight. The cop returned to tell me he couldn't find anyone, and he had driven around the entire block and back area behind the golf course. I showed him the footage and printed out a picture from the camera. The cop said he didn't see any sign of the guy, and that he would patrol the area and to call back if he came again. It was now nearly 5 a.m. when the cop left. I waited until 6 a.m. when it was daylight and the people were starting to get out and about before I walked around and hung up all the phones from the call boxes. This guy literally took all the 12 phones off the hook. When my manager came in during the morning shift at 8 a.m., I told her what happened, and she said that they would keep an eye out and have a meeting to let everyone know who worked here know and to be aware. They had an extra security guard on my shift for 2 weeks after, but the guy never returned. The cops never found the guy or who he was. So crazy bloody guy with a knife, let's not meet again. A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in Chequamegon National Forest in northern Wisconsin, and after our experience, we do not plan to return unless we go with a large group of people. My girlfriend and I are from college, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to place for R&R. We've done a number of hiking trips in northern Wisconsin and in the UP, but never to this area. We are not backpacking experts, but we have been to a number of national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find the time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in nature, but this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike a remote section of the North Country Trail. The North Country Trail is a national scenic trail, like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote, and the only access is via logging roads. We plan to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpack shelter, spend the night, and hike back to the car the following day. We spent the night at a friend's house in Wausau, and we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest boundary, we were captivated by the beauty of the thick green forest. I drove slowly along the gravel logging roads as we made our way to our own parking spot. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be campers, as they had a rusted out, bunged up pickup truck. As we drove past, I waved, and they stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. After we passed them, I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed they were still staring at us. And before we rounded a bend, I glanced back into the mirror again and saw them watching us through the haze of road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we did not think anything of the encounter. Aside from those people, we did not encounter anyone else on the remote logging roads within the national forest boundary. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later after winding our way on the narrow logging road. There was no one else parked at the trailhead, a perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our packs and set off on the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way, and we marveled at the lushness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of a wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter fire ring, and I boiled water for our dehydrated trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around a Nalgene filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars you could see away from the city. When the fire was reduced to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head back to our tent. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures we took that day, but after lugging a heavy pack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. When we camped at state and national parks, I usually wore earplugs, but that night, there were no RVs or other campers to make noise, so I closed my eyes and let the noise of the forest lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night, but she normally had some apprehension whenever we were sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when we drifted to sleep, but we awoke to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point, and we lay silently in our tent, hearing the noise again. Our old tent had mesh windows, but the backpacking tent we were using had no window. We could only guess at what was making the sound outside our tent. We initially thought that an animal had got our food and garbage bag, which we left in the shelter, but the noise was too distinct, and it did not sound like rustling through food wrappers or our camp equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard the persistent knock in the darkness. Unarmed and scared, we did not know what to do. I would normally have carried a can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save on weight, against the wishes of my girlfriend. The knocking continued, but we remained still as to not give away our location. For all we knew, whatever was making the noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the knocking sound ceased. We lay in complete silence with only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then we heard it, leaves rustling, a branch breaking, voices. We heard low talking in the distance. We could not make out what was being said, but it sounded like a couple of people talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, the voices did not seem to be getting louder. Whoever was out there did not spot the tent or decided to leave us alone. We sat in our tent for the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly got out of our tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was out there, but I only saw the forest and the backpack shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camp pads and put our tent away. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. On the entrance to the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word "kill" was cut into the shelter wall, and there were a number of axe and knife cuts where someone was chopping at the wall. I looked at the ground and saw a scattering of fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and garbage bag, we got out of there. We were nearly jogging with our gear as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing back over my shoulder and gazing out through the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed the glacial eskers that we saw the day before, and we knew we were getting closer to our car. We were quietly rejoicing as we neared the trailhead. We made it back to the trailhead in near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up and there was something stuck in the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw there was blood smeared on the windshield and a squirrel carcass was impaled on the wiper blade. Hair and blood still stuck to the wiper and on the hood of the car. I didn't bother cleaning off the car. We threw our gear in the trunk and I sped off without removing the animal from the wiper blade. As I sped down the gravel logging road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I could not see anything through the cloud of road dust behind the car. When we got to a gas station by the nearest town, I removed the carcass with a wad of newspaper, and I tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas and we didn't stop until we made it to Milwaukee. This was the last trip I took to the woods of northern Wisconsin. A few years ago, my friend Tez and I set out on the Great American Road Trip. We were going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, zigzagging through the country for 6 weeks. We were both in our early 20s, pretty broke, and as my mom had been a long-haul trucker, I suggested that to save a ton of money, we would sleep in the back of our hatchback. It was a pretty cozy setup. We bought some blankets and sheets at Goodwill and cut one of them up to make curtains. By the end of the first week, we gotten so we could set up camp in about 10 minutes. Luggage moved to the front, curtains up, bedding laid down and out for the night. We slept in parking lots, free campsites, rest areas, basically anywhere it seemed safe and semi-legal. There was never a night after the first night where we felt scared until the last week of the trip in Arizona. We were near Flagstaff and had gotten pretty used to our routine. We didn't go on a set schedule and would never drive more than 3 or 4 hours a day. No destination really in mind, outside a few must-see landmarks. We drive to places we found the night before on Google and take suggestions from other campers, locals, and people we met. We'd also gotten very good at making friends. We went to Denny's with a group of people we met at a campsite in the back of their pickup because I got hungry and overheard them saying they were going to go. We met an 80-year-old cowboy who took us out drinking and taught us to line dance at a country bar, played the guitar with some musicians in the middle of a thunderstorm, got fed breakfast and dinner by tons of campers who invited us to hang out with them, spent the 4th of July with a family who basically adopted us into their campsite. Basically, every encounter we had with a stranger was a positive one. This night didn't look out to be any different. We found a free campsite on Google and drove up into the woods, following our GPS. We were pretty far out of town and something seemed a little bit off when we pulled up to the campsite. There was one RV parked and 2 cars further up in the trees. We pulled up near the RV and a man opened the door. Tez waved hello and he just stared at her. His expression was completely blank. Then, as if she hadn't said anything, he just slowly closed the door again, staring at us the entire time. Figuring he just wanted some privacy and thought we'd be obnoxious, we pulled further down the road and found a flat spot to park the car. Instead of our usual routine of setting up camp immediately while it was still light out, we goofed around for a while, smoking and laughing and taking dumb photos of ourselves. Tez pointed out a campfire further down the campsite and we decided to go be friendly. We'd met some pretty cool people in the previous 5 weeks by just going up and offering beer or just chatting, so we wandered over. Near the campfire there were 2 men, the owners of the cars we'd seen earlier. They seemed friendly and we sat down to chat with them. They were drinking and smoking and we sat down and had a beer with them. One of the men seemed pretty off, and we came to find out that the 2 of them didn't actually know one another. The older man was definitely on some sort of drugs. He was spinning in circles and talking about UFOs. However, he seemed harmless. This left us chatting with a younger man, who claimed to be a former park ranger. He was handsome and easygoing, and we spent several hours just chatting up about our trip, families, everything. Then he started talking about the bear. He'd seen a bear earlier in the forest. Tez didn't believe him and he pulled out his camera to show her photos of the bear. It was very close to the campsite, and we both were a little freaked out. It wasn't unheard of us for one of us to go get up to the bathroom in the middle of the night, so the idea of a bear hanging around in the night spooked us. The ranger just laughed, and then his expression changed completely. It's hard to describe, but his voice seemed somehow cold. He said, "If you get out of your car in the middle of the night, it's not a bear you should be worried about." I kept waiting for the laugh, or for him to nudge Tez with his elbow. Jokes on the foreigner and the city girl, right? He never did. I laughed awkwardly and made a dumb joke about serial killers in the woods. My friend laughed as well and joked about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We moved on to another subject, but within 5 minutes, the ranger had come back to it and was talking about how something grabbing us from our car in the middle of the night. No matter how we tried to steer the conversation away from serial killers, he kept latching back on. The older man was high as a kite at this point and was staring at the stars, not talking. We would just awkwardly laugh and sip our beer and try to get the conversation going somewhere else. Then the ranger stood up and walked towards the cooler to get another beer. At this point, it's pitch black out, and I can't see anything outside the circle of light from the campfire. The beer cooler was outside of that circle. Suddenly, there's a red dot in the darkness, and it took a moment for me to realize that it's a camera. The ranger is holding a camera. He had taken a photo of us. I could see the screen of the digital camera lit up. Now, it wasn't odd for people we met to ask to take pictures with us. It was an entirely strange thing to have this person taking a photo of us without asking or even indicating that that's what he was doing. We were both staring at him like deer in the headlights at this point, but instead of realizing what he was doing was a bit weird, he checks his camera, adjusts some things, and takes another photo, this time with the flash. No asking us to smile, no proposing a group photo, and no explanation. After this photo, he comes back to the fire and sits down, not a word said about the photo. At this point, me and Tez are mutually freaked out. We make some BS excuse that we need to go set up our campsite and nope the heck out. When we stand to leave, the UFO guy smiles and says to have a good night. Ranger, however, looks at us with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes and says, "Be careful out there. There's more than bears in the woods." Every hair on my body stood on end. I wasn't alone in my discomfort either, because Tez laughed a response out and pulled me away from the campfire towards our car. We rushed back to the car, which we only found in the dark by referencing the RV, and jump in the front seats. My friend Tez is all but hyperventilating. "Why did he take pictures of us?" I was shaking. I responded, "I read that serial killers sometimes warn their victims." She stared at me for a second and locked the car doors. "Do you think he just took victim photos of us?" We both freaked out. She's in a full panic and turns the headlights on in the car. I immediately yell at her to turn them off, because now he knows exactly where our car is. That is the only night we not set up camp. We didn't need to tear anything down, so we just put the car in drive and floored it out the campsite. As we got into the dirt road, Ranger was walking towards our car with that same cold expression. "Ranger, let's not ever meet again." This happened on a Sunday night when I was about 10 years old, in the mid-90s. My family house was on a short street, a dead end created by a railroad track. We had a 3-story house, which was the farthest from the tracks, with windows on every floor, 2 in the basement. The stairs from our bedrooms upstairs led directly to the front door, which connected to a closed-in mudroom/porch, which also had a screen door and a glass door that only locked from the inside. Even friends and extended family would wait outside to be let into the porch, as that's where the doorbell was. From inside the porch, you could see right up the stairs through the window in the door. Across the house, parallel to the front door, was the back door. Both had a large window in them. It must have been June because my older brother had a soccer game, and I only had a week of school left. I personally found watching him struggle on the field and being forced to cheer while being eaten by bugs really boring, and I just gotten a box set of books I desperately wanted to be alone with. After about an hour of reasoning and pleading, I finally convinced my parents to let me stay at home alone for the first time while they went to the game. They were only going to be gone for a few hours, and although we didn't live in the best neighborhood, our neighbors were close family friends. I'd be fine. Mistake. Usually before a game we'd all go out and eat together, but since I was staying home, they ordered a pizza from down the street, my brother's favorite. I'd already been face deep in the first book for half an hour when the doorbell rang. Pizza. I walked out from my bedroom and down the stairs to my living room. I got to the bottom of the stairs, and my father was at the door having a conversation with the delivery guy. They were talking about soccer, so I just decided to take the pizzas and keep on keeping on, which is when I noticed the delivery guy staring at me, intently. He was a middle-aged Caucasian with an accent, and he was smiling at me in a way I recognized. It was the same smile I had on my face when I told my parents I was old enough to spend the evening in the house alone. Fake, but convincing. I walked past him through the living room to the kitchen and threw the pizzas on the counter and shoved my face into my book. My father talked to him for a few more minutes about sports. and then closed the door. My family sat down to eat and chat while I forgot all about them, the food, and the delivery guy. Before they left, around 6:30 p.m., my parents wrote down all the emergency numbers, gave me instructions not to open the door, and headed out with my brother, and I waved them off, excited to finally have the house to myself, if only to read in silence. I locked the main door and headed up to my room to read. It was blissfully quiet, save for the sound of my dog's occasional barking in the backyard. I had just finished the first book, and immediately started on the next when the doorbell rang, and my dog lost it in the backyard. I was up in my bed immediately. I looked at my alarm clock for the first time since they left. It read 8 p.m. My whole family was at the game, and any extended family in the province was as well. No one would be coming over without calling, especially on a Sunday night. The doorbell rang again, and again. I remained frozen in place, my book crumpling in my shaking hands. I, for the first time, was completely alone and terrified. My sly kid smile flashed in my mind. I thought I was so clever convincing my parents I wasn't scared to be alone. And then another smile flashed in my memory. The pizza guy. And then the banging started. Loud successive bangs that rattled me if not the house. And now from the backyard my dog was livid. I could hear him barking and whining at the back door. I wanted to call someone, but the only phone was in the kitchen, which involved walking right past the front door. I panicked. I was scared to leave my room, as my feet would be visible to whomever it was once I entered the hallway. But what if it was just a neighbor? I checked the alarm clock again and was surprised that only minutes had gone by, and my parents wouldn't be back for an hour and a half, minimum. I'd have to wait it out, so I did. I got up as silently as possible and closed my bedroom door. Eventually, all the barking, ringing, and banging stopped. I waited for half an hour, and then opened my door and crept out of my bedroom. I crept down the hallway to the top of the stairs, trying to press myself into the far wall, as out of sight as possible, but all the lights were on, and I realized that it was obvious that someone was home. I peered quickly down the stairs in the window, looking through to the glass porch door, and saw no one. Luckily, no one was there. I tore down the stairs and ran for the back door and checked outside. Nothing but my dog, who was all too happy to run inside. I let him in through a crack and slammed the door after him, locking it, and I realized it had been locked before. I turned to the phone, grabbing it, and about to dial my neighbor's number, when my dog started acting like he was going to the vets. A low growl accompanied by a crouch, backing away. I froze and looked in his direction, then followed his gaze to the window in the inner front door, where inside my porch, past the front screen and glass doors, stood a man I've never seen before, and he was staring at me, livid. I froze, paralyzed with fear as I looked at him, and I couldn't look away. He was tall, slim, and had bags under his eyes. His hair was shoulder length and unkempt. He lifted his hand and placed it on the window, and then looked down, as he tried to turn the knob, twice, but it was locked. I came out of my paralysis the second his eyes left mine, and I moved quickly to the side of the wall that led to the basement stairs. It blocked us from being able to see each other. Hiding felt good. My dog, still in the corner, inched towards me, low to the ground and still growling. I couldn't breathe, my heart was pounding. This couldn't get any worse. Wrong. I saw you, boy. I saw you. Open the door. My stomach nestled in my throat. I started crying. I've never really had a flight or fight moment. Only flight or flight. But there was nowhere to go. Back upstairs led right past him, and going down into the basement seemed even more terrifying, as I'd have to walk past the window in the middle of the staircase that looked out into the alley leading to my backyard. I saw you. You can't hide forever. You have to pay. You have to pay. He screamed through the door window, shaking the door as he pulled on it. I thought he would just break the window and unlock the door, so I descended slowly down to the steps to the basement, going just halfway to put some distance between us. I stood still, waiting, and then silence. For a minute, nothing, and then the sound of the glass door and screen door to the outside opening and slamming. More silence. My dog straightened out, walked over to the top of the stairs, and then looked right past me, and started growling. I can still see you. I see you. I see you, boy, and you have to pay. I jumped and turned my head, and through the window to the alley, I saw his face. He was laying on the ground, staring at me. I see you. I know you're home. I see you. I bolted up the stairs to the inner front door, ripped it open, and then locked the glass door to the porch, and backed up into the living room, closing the main door behind me, locking that too. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and unplugged it, and turned back around. He was at the door again, this time outside the porch. I steered myself and ran up the stairs with the phone, dog in tow, to my parents' bedroom, which was the only room with a working phone jack and a lock on their door. And then the doorbell started to ring. I closed and locked their door behind me, left their light off, and plugged in the phone. I dialed my neighbors and got their answering machine. I dialed again, no answer. Every ring of the phone was matched by a ring of the doorbell. I called them over and over, finally whispering a message. "Tom, it's Kevin. I managed trying to get into the house and I'm alone. I peered out of my parents' window and looked down into the front yard. He was still there, pacing, walking up and down the stairs, looking in the windows, walking out of sight as he entered the alleyway and then back into the front. I noticed my neighbor's car wasn't there. They weren't even home. And it still hadn't occurred to me to call 911, so I hunkered down and waited for my dog, watching from the corner of the window. He walked back up the porch, tried the door, and then the doorbell went off a few more times. And then he walked down the stairs and headed back out into the street. He walked a bit down the sidewalk away from the dead end, towards the main road, and then stopped, and turned around, walking back towards the house. He stopped again and looked up, directly at the window I was looking through, but the room was dark. He couldn't see me. Instead of turning back around, he continued walking down the street, and crossed the street when he reached the train tracks. He walked back up the other sidewalk, staring at my house all the while, and kept going until he reached the main intersection, and turned the corner. I stood in the corner of the window, watching the street for what seemed like hours, until my parents' car pulled up in front of the house, along with the neighbor's car. They all got out and my mother headed towards the house while my father started chatting with the neighbor's husband. I unlocked the door and booked it downstairs, instantly crying with relief as I unlocked the inner door, and then the glass porch door. I recounted the night's events to my parents in the kitchen through tears, and they had just started to calm me down. And that's when the doorbell rang. I started to shake and cry again, and my father burst out of his seat and barreled towards the door and swung it open. And there he was, the man. He stood there smiling a disgusting smile, and I immediately took off down into the basement. My mother was right behind me. I heard my father and him arguing loudly for a few minutes, and then my father slamming the door. My father called my mother and I back upstairs, and then after I made him promise the man was gone, I walked up into the kitchen. My father sat me down and explained the situation. Earlier, my father hadn't had enough cash on him for the pizzas. He had told the delivery guy that he would be back in 4 hours, but had to make the game and didn't have time to get more cash. The delivery guy agreed, wished my brother good luck in his game, and then had passed the message on to the guy who would be working the closing night shift. The delivery guy had misunderstood, thinking that he was to return immediately and collect payment. He explained it all to my father as if he had rang the doorbell a few times, and then had left. Not that he had been circling the house terrifying me for over an hour. He told my father he wasn't sure if anyone was home, so he looked around back, but only saw my dog, so he left, only returning, coincidentally, minutes after my parents returned, armed with a convincing story. Kids have such an imagination. Sorry that I frightened him. Suffice it to say, but I brought my books with me to every soccer game after that. This happened a couple weeks ago. I'm 17 and my parents were out of state for the month on vacation. I live in a small, nice neighborhood that has quite a distance from any other neighborhoods around us. My neighborhood likes to be involved with each other, so there's always neighborhood summer barbecues and neighborhood parties now and then. Everyone always attends to these, so I'm very familiar with who lives in the neighborhood as I can name off a majority of them. My neighborhood is always dead quiet after 9 p.m. as the kids are inside by then and families are usually heading off to bed. I meant to spray paint art and I decided I wanted to work on a painting in my garage at around 10 p.m. because it was cooler by then. Mind that the garage door is fully open. I'm setting out a tarp so I can start painting when I hear someone walking on the sidewalk. I look up expecting to say hi to a neighbor going on a late night walk around the neighborhood. Instead, it's a man I thought I couldn't recognize at first glance due to it being dark and the only distant light source around was from the garage. He was at least 6'3", lanky, and looked completely normal for what I could see. The man stood at the end of my driveway facing me. With the little light stretching across the driveway hitting his face, I didn't recognize him. I live in a very friendly state where we're usually nice to strangers and make conversations. I thought nothing suspicious as he could have been just a neighbor I wasn't familiar with, so I just struck up a conversation like I usually do. Hi, how's it going? Hi, it's going good so far. Sorry, I don't really recognize you because it's so dark. Oh, I'm Xavier. I don't think I've ever met you before. Did you just move into the neighborhood or something? Yeah, I moved into the corner house up the street. You moved in with the Millers? Yeah, the Millers. I moved in with them. They're my cousins and they're letting me stay with them until I figure some things out. I thought nothing of this, as this seemed normal for a family to let a member of theirs stay with them for a while, and the Millers are just those kind of people. Well, I better get going. I need to finish something. It was nice meeting you, Lainey. I never introduced myself, I think? Oh, the Millers told me all about you. I thought nothing of this as well because I would babysit the Millers' kids frequently and my family is close with them. Xavier kept walking and I thought nothing of what just happened and started painting. The next morning I went on a run to my high school that was about 3 miles away. My high school is on a common road that always has cars on it. As I was nearing the school, I heard a car pull up behind me. I stopped running and turned around to see a beat up car with the windows rolled down. A smiling man was sitting in the driver's seat. He looked to me at his mid to late 20s and he had a fairly handsome face. Hi. I probably had a confused look on my face as I didn't recognize the man, but I knew his voice from somewhere. Xavier, we met the other night. Oh, hi, sorry, I didn't recognize you. It's fine. Hey, you're pretty far from home. That's quite a long run. Aren't you tired? I can give you a ride home if you like. Oh no, it's fine. I like running. Thanks for the offer though. Wanna go out for a cup of coffee? No thanks, I don't drink coffee. We don't have to get coffee then. I'll pay for you. Come on, I wanna go get something with you. No thanks, I'm not really interested. Oh come on, let's go. Hop in. He reaches over to open the passenger door and beckons me to come in. At this point, it's clear that I don't want to go, and I step off from the grass and back onto the sidewalk. I said no, sorry. Come on, just get in the car. It's not a big deal. I gotta go. Some friends are expecting me. That's when I fall and sprint to the school's track and called a friend to pick me up. While waiting at the track for my friend to pick me up, Xavier's beat up car goes down the road, away from the direction of my neighborhood. Few bad things happened in my city, so I didn't think much of what happened and shook it off, which was stupid of me to do. A couple of days later, there was a neighborhood barbecue. Although my parents weren't home, I didn't mind going to the barbecue alone because it's always a blast. I hung out with my neighborhood friends like I usually do. I saw the Millers and had a friendly conversation with them, which soon turned to, oh, I met Xavier the other night. The Millers didn't know who I was talking about. They said they didn't know an Xavier, no family member moved in with them. I told them about what happened at the school the other day while I was on my run. The Millers and I are freaking out about now. They call over one of our neighbors who's a cop, we'll call him John. John lives a couple houses down from me. I tell him about the confrontations I had with the guy and what he looked like. He told me to call him or the cops if I didn't feel safe or if I encountered the guy again. John patrolled around our neighborhood for a few weeks. Neighbors kept a lookout for Xavier and didn't let their children out late. There was no sign of Xavier for 2 weeks. I got back from a friend's house late at night. I pulled into the garage and went inside, turned on the lights, and I was making something to eat. Then there was a soft knock on the front door. It was late. I got back from a friend's and my guard was down, so I walked across my house like I usually do. From the front door, you can hear footsteps if someone is walking to the door normally and not trying to hide their steps. I thought it was just a friend. I looked through the peephole and saw a wide smile that belonged to Xavier. He was at my door, late at night, and he had a large backpack with him. He heard my footsteps and I could hear him say, "I'm sorry about last time. I didn't mean to be like that, Lainey. It was just a bad day," through the door. I wanted him to go away. I meant to yell, "Get away from me," through the closed door, but all that came out was a lame whimper. I just came to apologize. Open the door. I don't mean any harm. He tries to wiggle the doorknob. His voice in constant pestering gets louder and louder. At this point, I'm freaking out and I couldn't think at all. I couldn't remember where I put my phone. My family doesn't have a house phone either. Xavier began pounding on the door and repeatedly pushing on the doorbell and kept repeating, "Open the door, Lainey. Open the door. They're waiting for us." My dog heard the ringing of the doorbell. I don't think he heard the soft knock because he was upstairs somewhere, but when my dog hears the doorbell, he's always excited to go look out the front window and see who's standing on the porch. If it's someone he recognizes, he'll just stand there quietly looking at them until one of us opens the door. When it's someone he doesn't recognize, he barks. He's a German Shepherd and his aggressive bark is very loud. My dog comes running down the stairs, looks at the window, and he doesn't recognize Xavier, so he starts barking at him from the window. Xavier laughs and I hear him say, "They never told me you had a dog. You're smarter than they said you were, Lainey." With my dog barking, I guess I snapped back into my senses. I realized I left my phone in my car in the garage. I called the cops and John. By the time they got here, Xavier was gone. I gave a description to them and they drove around the area for an hour looking for the guy, but they never found him. I stayed at a relative's house for a couple of days until my parents got back and we changed all the locks in the house and installed a security system along with floodlights. My parents had me on lockdown. John patrols around the neighborhood for a while after his shift ends every night now. Xavier, let's not meet again. I'm from the middle of nowhere, born and raised, which can get awfully boring. In order to shave off boredom in my particular little corner of nowhere, my friends and I often enjoy something called contra dancing, which is basically New England folk dancing, where one pairs off with a different, random partner at each dance. This hobby would bring us to all corners of the area and in contact with lots of interesting and usually older people. One night, a friend and I had driven about 40 minutes into the woods to this old townhouse. It's an incredibly scenic little area. Even at night, great view of the stars, crickets chirping, people dancing in the tiny town hall. A perfect hot summer night with friends and about 60 others. Again, mostly old town folk. I had even made cookies for everyone to enjoy, which was announced at the beginning of the dance and was applauded by everyone there. I had danced maybe 2 dances when an older man in his mid-60s approached me for a dance. This was far from unusual. In fact, most of my dance partners were over 40. I had seen this guy at several contra dances, so he definitely wasn't new. This guy came off kinda creepy though. Most of the older guys struck 18-year-old me as grandfatherly, but some just are uncomfortable to be close to. I refused him, saying I promised my friend a dance. He insisted that I dance the dance after with him. Not wanting to be rude, I agreed, trying to be as perky as possible so he didn't know he was making me uncomfortable. "You look so beautiful tonight," was the first thing out of his mouth when we paired up for the dance. I kind of just smiled and nodded. I didn't want to be encouraging. He was sweaty, had a walrus mustache, and was bald except for a crown of gray hair. The dance was a particular extravagant one, with a move called a gypsy, when the partners stare into each other's eyes while circling around each other into a swing. He started making remarks under his breath during this move, such as, "Get over here," and "Can't get away from me," while pulling me closer. Gross, but nothing too bad. "I heard you made the cookies. They were delicious. I'll have to get the recipe out of you, or just make you my wife. Then I have them all to myself." I almost stopped the dance to get away from him, but I shut down and refused eye contact and conversation. I was sufficiently grossed out, but it was nothing too bad. I pulled my friend aside after and told her about him, and then enjoyed the rest of my night. After summer dances, the young people often drive down to a small pond and swim to get off the sweat and grossness of the dance. Skinny dipping is encouraged, as this spot is really in the middle of nowhere, no houses around, and an absolute amazing view of the stars. My friend and I spent about 20 minutes hanging out in the water, with people slowly leaving until we were the only ones left. That's what I thought, at least. Until I saw a figure standing at the bank of the pond staring out at us. I didn't call out, assuming it was one of our friends. I swam closer, starting to get out of the water. It wasn't until I was actually fully out of the water, clothed only in a t-shirt and underwear, that I recognized the old man from before. A lurch of fear and wrongness I felt in that moment I will never forget. I have never seen anyone above the age of 25 go down to the pond with us, and he was fully clothed and not there for a swim. He also wasn't saying anything. "Shannon, we have to go now," I yelled back at her. The pond bank was narrow and it was hard to scramble around him. I was pretending I couldn't see him, that he wasn't there, or that I didn't care he was there. Shannon was about 20 feet behind me when he turned to follow me back to the cars. The rocks were painful to walk on and made it hard to move quickly. "I heard you guys were coming down here," he said. At this point, Shannon was just coming near him. She did not recognize him from earlier stories. It wasn't reacting to the creepiness as strongly as I was. "Haha, yeah, sometimes we cool off down here," Shannon replied. He got between me and her, blocking her from the car. "You know, you and your friend look like sisters. I heard she made the cookies. Do you cook as well as her? I'd love a pair of you at home." This is when the situation really hits Shannon. We're alone, with this guy who's apparently followed us to the middle of nowhere, with unknown intentions. "It was nice talking to you, but we have to go now. Come on, Shannon." I was practically running to the car, throwing the words over my shoulders. He put a hand on Shannon's bare shoulder, which spurred her after me. "Come on, you two. I'm just trying to have some fun." I was already in reverse by the time Shannon got in the car with me. We tore out of the dirt road at about 50 miles per hour. It hit pavement at around 70. I almost puked when I saw headlights turn out from the road, following us. Since I was about 40 minutes from home through all the back roads, I took a gamble and headed towards the nearest gas station, followed the whole way. We stopped at the station, right in front of those huge windows in front. He slowed down, looked at us, and then sped away. I haven't seen him at a contra dance since, which is the scariest thing to me, as he used to be a regular. In my experience, contra dancers are a loyal bunch, but this guy just sort of drifted in for a couple months and disappeared just as quickly. Still makes me uncomfortable to think about. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there for too long, without anything else going for you at least. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is at Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone services or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes, there are really shifty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around on the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll just see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along roads meant for a truck. All that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, two of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the National Forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decided to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service Rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like trucks had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up the tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time, and I just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. None of us thought that it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that is more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we're eating, we noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kinda like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself though. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. My other friend Isaac decides to stay behind to pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seems strange that a beaver would go around all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I start talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh crap." A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what the light was after all. We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to our campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed a little odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we'd probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering at the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes, he mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They're locked up in the cab of the trunk. Did you unlock it? We go and check the trunk, enter the door code, and see all of our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the trunk were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I ask. I was watching a movie on my phone, then I fell asleep, I guess. But you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? Isaac said that he had been in the tent since we left, and that he had been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us were way too drunk to drive, but we decided to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent, which is folded down with the sleeping bags and everything in it. We jump in the F-150 and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car to try to move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off. It must have just been balanced on the top, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off of it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It stays just 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go to a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DOI luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be very dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again. When I was 15 years old, I lived in a rural area about 20 minutes outside of the actual town I called home. I was home from school alone one day, and a white car pulled up in front of our mailbox and stopped. I was upstairs in my room and saw from the window, but could not see who was in the car. Whoever it was sat there for several minutes without getting out of the vehicle, long enough to weird me out, and then drove away. We weren't super close in distance to our neighbors, but we weren't miles and miles apart, and I remembered that one neighbor a bit down was selling their house. I chalked it up to a potential buyer having the wrong address, or simply checking out the neighborhood, and thought nothing else of it. Fast forward about a week or so, it was a Friday night and I had gone downtown to see the premiere of a movie with my boyfriend at the time. I remember it was a special occasion and I had begged my parents consistently for weeks to push back my curfew so I could see this movie, since it wouldn't be over until after 1 a.m. and it took 20 minutes to get home from town. They were reluctant but finally agreed. When the movie was over, my boyfriend Jason and I walked slowly to the truck. It was a well-lit and relatively safe area, so we stood around in the parking deck trying to push curfew for as long as possible. There weren't many vehicles at the time of night, but I realized suddenly that I recognized the one parked straight across from us, the same white car that had been at my house a week earlier. The car was running, and there was a man, probably mid-30s, sitting alone inside. I could have passed this all off as a coincidence, except as I continued to look at him, he turned his bright lights on us and spun out of the parking deck after almost running into Jason's truck. I obviously had a horrible feeling about this and asked Jason to take me home immediately. As we pulled out of the garage, we saw the car parked across the street from the movie theater. All the lights off, man still inside, but he didn't follow us, so we just went home a little shaken. I had no idea at the moment, but this was the start of 3 long, torturous years of being stalked by this man. A couple of months after the parking deck situation, the encounters became more frequent and weirder, and I hated being anywhere alone at any time. I never knew when and where I could see him, or how much time would pass between encounters. It became clear that he was watching me all the time by this point because he only made himself known when I was alone or with my boyfriend, never my parents or even other friends. I became terrified, for some stupid reason, that none of my friends would believe me if I told them I kept it between Jason and my family. Until one day, my friend Rachel, who lived maybe 5 miles away from me, started telling me about this creepy man who showed up at her house over the weekend. Rachel's dad worked Saturdays, so she was home alone with another friend of ours, Megan. Everything was normal until around dusk when they began to smell cigarette smoke. My heart instantly began racing because, by this time, this was becoming an everyday occurrence for me. I was smelling cigarette smoke, finding cigarette butts around my house even though none of my family smoked, and could never trace the source. I had a nagging feeling, of course, that it was connected to my stalker, but hadn't confirmed. So as Rachel and Megan were looking for the source of the smoke, Rachel realized she had left a window in a back room open and the smoke was coming in from the back porch. Seeing that there was a strange man on our porch, she quickly goes to close and lock the window and, in her words, he turns around with dead eyes and looks straight through her like she wasn't really there. Megan immediately called the police, but Rachel continued to stand there in a little bit of shock as he smirked at her and stared until his cigarette was gone. He then got up and calmly walked away. The police came but found no trace of him except for cigarette butts on the porch and scattered around the backyard, indicating he had been there for quite some time. I immediately began to describe the creep to Rachel, and it was the same man. She hadn't seen or heard the white car at all, and they guessed that he had parked down the road and walked down Rachel's almost mile-long driveway or through the woods a bit. As time went on, my stories were well documented with the police department, but they had never even seen the guy. He was so good at getting away. I have to give them credit because they never doubted the truth of my stories and always showed up quickly even as it was becoming apparent that the guy knew what he was doing. It wasn't planning to be caught anytime soon. We also began to suspect he had a police scanner in his car. One night in particular, almost 2 years after the Rachel incident, Jason and I were coming home a little early from a date. My parents had gone out as well that night, and we had a strict rule that we couldn't be home alone with no adults. So Jason and I began to talk in the driveway since my dad had called and they were only about 10 minutes away. We were too scared, given the circumstances, to get out of the truck, and we kept our eyes peeled for the creep, but we figured 10 minutes wasn't all that long. Sure as the world, not even a minute later we saw headlights turn on in the bushes across the street from my driveway. This freak had backed his car into the bushes and waited for us to come home. Jason immediately got on the phone with the cops, and I called my dad, who was literally flying home at this point, as the man revved up his engine and flashed his lights. He then proceeded to get out of his car and walk toward Jason's truck. I will never forget, he was so slow, methodical, and emotionless. It felt like I was living out of a serial killer movie. I was sobbing. We had the doors locked, of course, as the man walked up to the passenger side where I was sitting and stood only a couple feet away from my window staring at me. He never made a move for the door. He simply stood completely still and stared. He held eye contact with me and his eyes were like black holes. Jason was a baseball player and had been keeping a bat in the backseat exactly for a moment like this. He pulled me toward him and away from the window and grabbed the bat, but this man didn't even flinch. He switched his gaze to the bat for a few seconds, smiled this huge and disgusting grin, walked back to his car and drove away. It seemed like 40 minutes passed, but it couldn't have been more than 5 because the man was gone for a couple minutes before my dad came into our driveway doing like 80 miles per hour. The cops never caught up to him. There were many more stories of torture, such as leaving dead animals outside of our front porch and shining flashlights into our windows in the middle of the night, but nothing anyone did could trip this guy up. My family had tried everything. My older brother had even desperately tried to chase the guy through the woods behind our house one night and lost him. The police wanted to help, but they only had my stories and the cooperation of my boyfriend, Rachel's encounter, and one kind of vague sighting of the car in town. I didn't even have a name for anyone to file a restraining order against. Not that it would have done me any good. And maybe the creepiest part of all this, in 3 whole years, he never spoke a single word. Then one day, just as quickly as he showed up, every single trace of him completely disappeared. Just like that. I never knew if he died, was arrested for some other crime, or just lost interest, even though that seemed highly unlikely. I just simply never saw him again, and it has now been 10 years. I still occasionally feel the lasting effects of that time, but thankfully, life has become pretty normal again. Needless to say, disturbed stalker who made me miserable for years, let's not meet again. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This took place when I was 19, now 28. I was in college and working as a bartender at a little country bar further out from the city. This place was also supposed to be a 21 plus only because there were gambling machines right along the bar, but the rule was, if anyone asked, you just turned 21. For the most part, I loved the job and loved the money. After a few weeks, I came in at 8 p.m. to start my shift, and it was already a pretty good crowd to be a weeknight. I make my rounds to see an attractive guy and his beer is empty, so I ask if he needs another. He immediately sparks up a conversation with me. I found out he's 28, a paralegal, has a dog, etc. He finishes his new beer and leaves me a $20 bill as a tip, with a rose he made out of a bar napkin. This continued nightly for about a week, and we eventually exchanged phone numbers. I ended up letting him know that I wasn't 21, just in case things progressed, and he said he didn't mind, blah blah blah. He would come into the bar nightly, text me after he left, and the following days, until he came back into the bar that night. About 2 weeks go by, and I take a long weekend to go out of town, around 3 hours away. It was St. Patrick's Day weekend that year, so my friends and I went to a party of course. The guy, we'll call him Patrick, that's convenient, was continuing to text me, but I never let him know I was going anywhere. Things weren't serious to me. I never hung out with him, outside of my work shifts, so what's there to tell? I then get a phone call from one of the girls at work telling me there's a guy there that will not stop asking me where I am and when I'm coming to work. Turns out, it's Patrick. Immediate red flag to me, but I didn't want them to deal with the drama, so I text him and let him know I'll be back on Sunday, leaving out that I would be back and going straight to work that evening because honestly, I didn't want him to know that I'd be at the bar. He continues to text me all weekend and I respond to keep the peace. I show up to work that Sunday to a new bouncer the owner hired. I can't tell you why, but I had this feeling, so I go ahead and spill about Patrick onto him just in case he showed up. A few hours pass and 2 guys come in and sit down. I stare at them for a minute and realize they're 2 guys that Patrick's been in there with before. I ask if they want anything and they just ask for water. Sure enough, after I notice one of them make a phone call, here comes Patrick in the door. I immediately shoot the bouncer a look and he catches my drift. Patrick sits down and I keep the convo short and get his beer. He just keeps watching every single move I make. They eventually get up and go to the pool table and the jukebox. Next thing I know, brown-eyed girl is playing. I have brown eyes, of course. And Patrick is standing there smiling at me. The song is over and I tell the bouncer to watch the bar for me. I needed to step out back and smoke a cigarette before I had a panic attack. I left the back door open so I could watch the bar for any new customers. Next thing I know, The Kill by 30 Seconds to Mars is playing. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. The bouncer comes to the door and is asking me for details about the guy and the situation. Here comes Patrick storming towards us. So he's why you aren't interested anymore? Literally starts a scene, going on about how he is heartbroken and I can't believe I could do this to him. I'm just standing there smoking another cigarette, watching the crazy unfold on this guy. The bouncer finally gets him out, and after a few minutes I felt like I could breathe and go on about my night. It's 3 a.m, so we start to clean up and the bouncer goes to take the trash out. He comes in and locks the door and tells me Patrick is in his car in our parking lot, but not to worry because he'll walk me to my car, and not go straight home in case Patrick tries to unleash more crazy on me. So I leave, and sure enough in my rear view is the face of a stalker. I decide to go to Sheetz and get some breakfast/dinner. That's a well-lit, busy place at any time of the day, right? I go in and order my food, and here comes Patrick. I keep my back to him hoping he'll take a hint, but this guy comes right up to me and puts his arm around my shoulders. I step to the side and he just casually laughs and then grabs my hand. I honestly can't even remember what I said, but something along the lines that he's a psycho and he leaves. I pay for my food, no sign of him in the parking lot, and head to my apartment. I remember being extremely anxious because you had to park across the street, but I made sure to have my key ready and everything in my hands to make a run for it. I get inside, lock the door, eat my food, shower, and finally lay down. Then I hear it, the doorknob slightly jiggling. I was frozen in fear. I hear it again, this time louder. I went to get up to look out the peephole, but the floor was so old and squeaky, I took one step and was frozen again. This went on for minutes, and then it finally just stopped. It was going to be daylight soon, so I just laid there until I was safe. I get a text from Patrick the next day, apologizing for the night before, asking to get lunch, and says he wants me to meet his mother. I tell him to stop contacting me. I found him on Facebook and went ahead and blocked him so he couldn't use that as a way to communicate. The text continued daily for months with no response from me, and I remember one day I didn't get a text and thought, oh, it's finally over. I received one text a year until I got a new number around 5 years ago and it would always say, thinking of you. Luckily I moved away and never ran into him again. I just can't help but think what would have happened if I wouldn't have gotten serious or went on a date with that guy. I had a stalker in junior high and high school. This was back in the early 2000s, without being too specific. As far as I know, this guy's still out there somewhere. We met each other through an extracurricular activity group, and he struck me as a shy and quiet guy. I was rather shy myself. For the time being, we had only seen each other at these extracurricular get-togethers maybe once or twice a month. I don't remember when it happened or how, but we exchanged phone numbers and he asked me to go to a dance with him at his high school since he was maybe 2 years older than me. Surprisingly, my mom agreed and I was genuinely excited. The day rolled around and we arrived at the town where the boy lived. The dance happened and we danced together pretty much exclusively from what I remember, and maybe only once did we dance very close together. Maybe a couple months down the road I had the opportunity to invite him to see a movie with my sisters and I, which we accepted and my parents agreed would be fine. All that happened at that time was we exchanged a few pleasantries before and after, but beside that we only watched the movie, and I wouldn't really have considered that to be a date. After some time the boy started calling me almost every week, which was fun and nice at first, but he was exceedingly awkward despite how long we'd been communicating, and continued to be just as awkward to talk to no matter how many times we spoke. His voice was always very low and soft, and he spoke almost exclusively in short sentences, letting me do most of the talking. Honestly, there wasn't much going on in my life, so we ran out of things to talk about pretty quickly, but he often kept me on the phone for about an hour each time. It came to be that after a time I would get sick of talking to him. He didn't really contribute to the conversations, and I didn't have an interesting enough life to carry it on by myself. In addition to the phone calls, the guy also had my home address and email too. He would send mostly funny chain letter type emails, and occasionally would write me a letter. The frequency of those was never enough to bother me, but the phone calls were really wearing me down. Later on we moved to a different state during the summer, and the guy weaseled my new phone number and address out of me. I was kind of hoping that he'd have lost interest at this point, but that was not the case. One afternoon, out of the blue, our doorbell rang and I answered it. Being the closest one to the door, to my surprise, the guy was there at the door along with a super tall male friend of his whom I didn't know or recognize. I greeted the guys with a smile and asked them what they were doing there. I didn't think it was weird at first, but the longer this interaction went on, the stranger it became. For one thing, neither one said a word, and they both came towards me like they were going to push past me to the house, but once they noticed my parents were there, they kinda stopped and looked at each other as if they didn't know what to do now. Me, not getting the gravity of the situation, invited them in and showed them the comic book I had been working on since the beginning of that summer. If the guy spoke at all, it was only very briefly, and his friend said nothing, nor was he introduced to me. Despite having driven supposedly from his hometown, which would have been more than 100 miles away mind you, they only stayed for maybe 5 minutes and then they both left. Only later did I fit the pieces together and realize that the picture it made was very dark and sinister. I decided after we moved to a different house that I wouldn't give him my forwarding address any longer, but he still had our home phone number, since that hadn't really changed. Maybe a year or two after the surprise visit, I was home from school at our new house when the phone rang. I answered it, thinking it could be one of my friends from school, but it was the guy. I sighed, being unwilling to just tell him I didn't want to talk, and sat on the stairs with my chin in my hand, wishing my mom would come home so she could get me off the phone. After a while, the guy asked me what was wrong because I wasn't talking that much, and I kept yawning or sighing, so I said, "I'm just tired." "Well, you don't look tired." My eyes started to all windows I could see from where I sat on the stairs. Could he see me? Where was he right now? How did he find our new house when I hadn't told him the address and we weren't listed in the phone book? I suddenly blurted out, "I have to go," hung up the phone, ran up the stairs, locked myself in the bathroom and called my mom. I was terrified that the next thing I would hear was glass breaking and him coming to find me in the house. Mom told me not to move and she would be home in a few minutes. I should have called the cops, honestly. The next time he called, only a few days later, and he acted like he hadn't been a creep at all just one phone call ago, I told him flat out that if he ever called me again, I would call the police. I am still afraid of this guy. I don't know how he found me, and I'm a little afraid he could find me again. Hopefully, I don't have to meet him again. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.